Hi, I'm Lauren Card, VP of Operations and Regulatory Affairs for PDA. Today, we're going to switch gears from our regulatory series and begin to highlight some of the amazing innovations that are being developed by the animal health industry. I'm speaking with Cal Lai, the Chief Executive Officer of AskVet, a U.S. company that has developed a digital resource app for pet parents that is powered by AI. Hi, Cal. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks so much for inviting me. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one because the topic today I know very little about. So this is going to be a great learning opportunity for me, and I think our viewers and listeners as well. So I'd like to start by just really kind of getting to know you. So could you kind of walk me through your academic and professional background? How did you get to where you are today?
Sure. I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii. I went to college at Stanford University. And my whole life, I've always been really excited by innovation and coming up with new ideas. And I became an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since I graduated from college. I've started 4 companies in over 45 years. And I think you can look at the thesis of my career as saying that I take really tough experiences, whether those are enterprise business experiences or consumer and user experiences, and utilize technology to really make those experiences much more joyous, fun, enjoyable, and efficient. I think we live in a digital age where so much of what was done before is done and was difficult to do. And I think a lot of things that were done because companies could provide these services, and they weren't necessarily what consumers or other businesses wanted, but we took advantage of whatever was offered to us. But I think with the digital age, we now can really provide much more customized solutions to solve both consumer and enterprise problems. So I've spent my entire career and built 4 companies around solving tough problems utilizing technology. And that's sort of the background. And I think that, that AI, generative AI and data are really the future of all of our economies and kind of a driver into what's going to create the experiences of the modern world. So that's really my background and who I am. So.
That's great. Thank you. And that was a really great segue. So AI, artificial intelligence, I want to go back to basics here. And I'm wondering if you can define for me what exactly that means.
That's obviously the $24 million question, right? And AI is not new, right? AI has been around for at least the last 40 years. And I think what's really the goal of AI is to use data and to be able to create insights and ultimately to be able to use those insights to take actions that would take human beings a very long time to do. Machines can process a lot quicker than we can. And I think we're on the very cusp of seeing how data and AI can transform experiences of all kinds. So, let's talk a little bit about AI and data. In my view, you can't use the word AI without using the word data. They're hand in hand, because in order for AI to be effective, it has to have a source material, right? And that material is data. And if you have good, solid data, AI is very, very powerful in its ability to ingest that data, to understand that data, to see correlations in that data, to develop insights from that data that are very difficult for an individual human mind to see. And I think the power of AI and artificial intelligence is it allows us to, it can make observations more quickly than we can, and make them at a much larger level of scale, and that's what you're really seeing, the transformative effect of generative AI. So let me kind of go back and explain, what I mean here. So I started AskVet in 2014. This is our 10th year in business, and what I really was set out to do was I knew that there was a big problem in the industry, and that problem was going to not get better, but get worse. And the problem I saw was that as animal health needs, both on the companion animal side, dogs, cats, our pets, as well as on the agricultural food production animal side, was rising. All of our societies have become wealthier, want to eat more protein. That means the creation of more animals, the slaughtering of more animals in order to feed our growing populations. Clearly, our pets are becoming a much more integral part of our families. As pet ownership, as animal agricultural tech ownership has grown, what really hasn't kept pace is veterinary expertise, whether those are veterinarians or whether those are veterinary technicians. The demand for services in animal health are far outstripping our supply and our ability to provide them. So I knew that that was a coming problem. That problem, as I said earlier, is getting worse, not better. So what we really set out to do was to understand what it is that both consumers and enterprises wanted out of veterinary expertise. So what I did was in 2014, I built the first virtual platform for animal telehealth. So we had veterinarians either via Zoom or via some sort of or phone or chat or texting, be able to have pet parents and agricultural professionals access veterinary advice instantaneously. And that was really our goal. So we set up a virtual system. We built a technology platform, the best in the world, to be able to deliver this on-demand veterinary advice. And we stood that up. And in the last 10 years, we've engaged with more than 2 million, both consumers and agricultural professionals who need instantaneous access to veterinary advice. All of those sessions in our system have been recorded. So we now have this database, a base of knowledge of real live recorded conversations between pet parents or between agricultural producers and our veterinarians and our veterinary technicians. So in 2017, I kind of said, boy, I know that if we applied AI to this data, it would be very, very powerful, because imagine the insights you'd be able to see, the data you'd be able to collect, and I thought this would be sort of change the way that industry deploys and utilizes veterinary expertise. So I created an initiative, and my company built what was something called My Pet Talk. My Pet Talk was a voice-oriented skill on both the Amazon Alexa and the Google Assistant platforms. At one point in time, My Pet Talk was the most commonly used and highly rated skill on both of those platforms. And what a pet parent or an ag professional could do is talk to My Pet Talk, ask a question, and she would respond with answers and advice. That was extremely powerful. The problem that was our doctor team had to build the scripts, the logic to answer those questions. And as you can imagine, that's a pretty laborious task. So it was very difficult for us to, once we built them, the experiences were very, very powerful. People loved the advice we were able to give, but it was difficult because we had to build all these scripts. And if someone asked a question that wasn't on the script, the system didn't know how to respond. So in 2019, I kind of said, boy, this is going to be really powerful once AI tools really allow for the ability for the system to generate the logics and the logic and the script behind answering these questions. And it wasn't possible at that time. Well, as we all now know, a company called OpenAI came along and late in Thanksgiving 2022 launched ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a large language model that takes information from the internet, builds out all those scripts so it's able to answer questions. A very, very formative change in AI. So what I think you're starting to see is you're seeing the application of tools to real data to create conversation bots. That's what large language models do, right? It's what I was trying to do with My Pet Talk. So instead of us having to write all these scripts and build these scripts, we were able to use generative AI in the form of ChatGPT, allow that to ingest all of our data of the 2 million transcripts that we had and be able to now respond in real natural language, because it was the language that our veterinarians use to speak to ag professionals and our pet parents. And we could now have real actual conversations between users and our bots that were very, very spontaneous, very natural language sounding. And the ultimate goal would be to provide veterinary advice to all of these users. We were able to do that. So within 6 months of the launch of ChatGPT, again, I've had an AI team for the last several years working on this. So we were able to stand up the world's most powerful digital veterinarian utilizing our data. So what we built a tool called Vera, VERA, Veterinary Engagement and Relationship Agent. Vera is a virtual veterinarian. She's ingested 2 million cases of real situations between pet parents and ag professionals and our veterinary team. She's ingested most of the curricula from, the world's major veterinary colleges. She's ingested toxicity tables. She can read lab results. We believe we've created the world's first virtual veterinarian, and she's incredibly powerful in her abilities. She speaks in natural language. She speaks 27 different languages. And most of our customers, both on the end user side, pet parents, and on the enterprise side, large agricultural businesses, find tremendous utilization for this veterinary expertise, because now instead of having human beings respond to these questions, the bot can respond to these questions. And in our data, our bot's able to answer 80% of the questions that either pet parents or agricultural professionals have without actually talking to a human being. So this digital worker, this digital veterinary worker, is incredibly powerful in her ability to answer questions. She not only can answer questions, but because we have a question answer database, because that's how our system was built, she can actually perform a differential diagnosis because she knows what questions to ask you in order to get to a very specific answer for your particular issue or problem. Now, in the United States, at least, we're prohibited from diagnosing, prescribing, treating because of VCPR rules. Those are changing too. Today, Vera operates within US VCPR, but we know that she's capable to make significant diagnosis in addition to being able to provide advice and recommendations to pet parents and ag professionals. So that's really the power of this tool that we built, that's all based on artificial intelligence. And I always laugh when I hear the term artificial intelligence, because it's not necessarily artificial as long as it has data, right? It's real intelligence because it's based on the learnings and the teachings of human beings. So what Vera's been able to do and our system's been able to do is ingest this tremendous amount of data, applying those large language models and being able to provide a veterinary bot that can answer 80% of the questions that a veterinarian can. So that's the power of artificial intelligence and data. You see these models occurring in finance and human medicine. Everywhere we turn, I think in the next 3 or 4 years, you're going to see the utilization of AI with the appropriate knowledge base of data that'll create really significant tools that will help us do the complex things that we all need to do in our society without necessarily accessing human experts. We'll be able to access virtual experts. So I think we're living in a time much like in 1991 when the internet just started hitting our collective consciousness. We're in that similar phase of with AI and with data than we were at the internet in the early to mid 1990s, the very beginning. And I think you're going to see some extremely transformative technologies, tools, products, use cases that will be developed using AI and data.
Okay, that was amazing. I guess I asked you a really loaded question, but you have ticked off a lot of the questions that I have. So that was a really great summary. So one of the things I was just wondering about is, so you said AI has sort of been around for 40 years. How is this regulated around the world, or is it regulated?
It isn't today. I think there's the world's trying to catch up. And, as is always the case, technology generally precedes policy, right? You saw it with Uber. Uber became a behemoth company before all of the, transportation regulatory commissions understood what was going on. And by the time they really tried to get involved, it was pretty much too late, because you can't put the genie back in the bottle once something as valuable as what Uber created appeared in the marketplace, right? And I think we're seeing something similar. I think a lot of government agencies, you see this with the Biden administration, trying to sort of try to get ahead of the curve with regards to AI. But as I said, policy always follows because it's really not yet clear on how AI should be utilized, will be utilized, can be utilized. So I think trying for the policymakers to anticipate the best ways that AI could and should be used and whatever guardrails are put around it, it's not practical yet. So I think you're going to have to see more real life use cases and unfortunately, sadly, some abuse of that utilization of AI before government regulations really have enough specificity to have teeth. So I think governments are really trying to figure out where this leads. I think everybody realizes that AI and data and its use can be both incredibly beneficial to humankind, also could be detrimental, but it's too early in the game for us to really put up significant guardrails. That's really the problem. So I think the governments will try. I think they're all making an attempt to understand it. And the reality is it's way too early to be regulated because we don't know what it is, where it's going to be utilized, and where it's going to be abused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. I want to go back to, because you brought up ChatGPT, which I think most people have a general understanding of. And so one of the things you mentioned was that with AskVets technology is this bot that you have has really been fed lots of sort of valid scientific information. And that's kind of what she uses to converse with pet parents, for example. But you said that ChatGPT is really kind of taking a wider internet approach in terms of how it's, I guess, building its database. And so I guess my question with that is, there's obviously a lot of reputable sites out there, but there's a lot of totally garbage sites as well. So can ChatGPT differentiate between what is true, what is facts, and what's not?
Lauren, you've hit upon a core question, and that's a very important thing to understand. The answer is no, because it's scraping the internet, right? And as you know, the internet's filled with great information, accurate information, and terrible, misleading, completely untrue information, right? And the problem with a generalized scrape like GPT does is it has no source of truth, meaning it can't discern what an appropriate and correct answer is versus an incorrect one because it's just scraping the internet. And I think there are a lot of people who say things like ChatGPT hallucinates or it makes things up, and I'm not sure that's an accurate description of what happens. I think what happens is ChatGPT scours the internet and it comes up with the answer that is what it believes is the most prevalent, but it may not be, right? And it may not be accurate. So, and it's something that I think most people who really understand AI are sort of very cognizant of. So one of the first things we did was we said, look, we know that our data, the data between the conversation our pet parents and ag professionals and our team is true because they're real veterinarians. We have about 200 licensed veterinarians who respond to these chats and texts and virtual calls over the last 10 years. We know their answers are mostly right because one, they're constantly checked, and two, our veterinarians are extremely well trained, and we go through a fairly significant vetting and due diligence process and put them into our system. So, and we have veterinary leaders who are constantly reviewing our team members' answers. So we know that we have significant quality control around our data. But at the same time, we needed to have control around whatever data we ingested. So we set up a 5-person veterinary team to make sure that every piece of data that our system ingested is accurate and valid. So what we know is, what we did was we utilized ChatGPT as our base layer large language model. That could be anybody. That could be BARD. It could be anybody else out there. We just happened to build it on top of GPT because they were first. Again, that layer is fungible. What's really special is we built a middleware layer, a layer that sits on top of native GPT that does a number of things. One thing it does is it creates a source of truth based on all of the quality control measures that our team have put in place. So we know every source of our team can see every source of data that was drawn upon when Vera creates an answer. We can correct it if we find that that's not accurate or could be slightly subtly different. So we built this truth layer, right? We know what the truth is. So Vera never gives bad answers because she has a source of truth, something that she can count on, unlike generalized GPT, where there is no source of truth. It's scraping the internet and giving you its most likely answer. But again, it may not be the right answer. So they have no source of truth. So that's an incredible distinction. You've got to create that source of truth. The other things that we do in this middleware there is that's where our language capabilities come in terms of veterinary terminology, to build a whole layer on top of that, because native GPT isn't necessarily expert on veterinary terminologies. The other key component in there is we built tone capabilities. We can change the tone. The way in which she responds could be more sympathetic, could be more clinical. We can make that tone in her speech very different, the way she presents, depending if we're talking to, if our user is a veterinary audience or an agricultural audience or a layperson pet parent audience. We have the capability to ask questions. And you'll look at most of the bots that have been created out of GPT. She can answer questions, but they can't ask questions. Given the conversational nature of the core of our data, we know what questions to ask based on previous questions and answers. So that gets into the concept that I mentioned earlier of a differential diagnosis. We can get to a very specific answer because we know the line of questioning is based on the 2 million sessions that we've had with our users. So we built this ability for Vera to ask questions of our users to get to better answers. So there are a number of modules that were built on top of our middleware there that ensures the quality of her response, that makes her response very, very human-like. In fact, in our data, 50% of the people who utilize the Vera tool don't realize, even though we disclose it, don't realize that they're talking to a bot, because the reaction and language is so natural and is based on real human speech that people cannot differentiate it. And many of our users actually start to talk to her as though she is a human being. So they say things like, God, thank you for being here for me. I really appreciate you. What would I have done without your being there? That's not something people would say to a bot, but they say that to her because they become so connected, because she empathizes. She can say, if we tone up for our consumer users, the empathy module is much more highly tuned to be empathetic. So she says things like, I'm really sorry to hear that your dog is experiencing these health issues. We'll get through this. She says, whereas if we're talking to a more clinical audience, users who are agricultural users, we have a tool that trains veterinarians. We have much more, her tone is much more clinical. So we don't need to say things of that nature, right? So we built these modules that really refine what native GPT does in a way that delivers really precise answers. And to take it even one step further, one of the things that we've done is we built the ability in our middleware layer for Vera to ingest a particular company's data. So let's say you're a company that has a significant portfolio of chicken pharmaceuticals. We can ingest all of your information about your pharmaceuticals, and we train Vera to answer questions based on those specific that specific information we ingested about your series of products. So not only does she have a base of medical knowledge, but now she has a very specific base of information that any one of our clients have asked us to ingest. So their version of Vera can answer very specific questions related to their products and their tools. So I think that's what's really important, that for all of our enterprise clients, and we have many of them in the food and the pharma and the veterinary services space, their version of Vera, we allow them to deploy it on their website, in their app, where she can answer questions, not just general medical questions, but about their products, all made possible because of this middleware that we built on top of ChatGPT, which I think is very animal industry focused and something that no one else in the industry has. And that's really what makes Vera such a powerful veterinary expertise tool. My belief is that my belief is that the supply will continue to outstrip demand because we just don't have enough expert veterinary resources out there, whether those in the form of veterinarians or technicians. And I think by putting veterinary expertise as close to the user as possible, one, we create a tremendously better experience for the user, but more importantly, we really help them solve real problems in a highly personalized and customized way. So that's really the promise of what we've delivered in AI. It's the ability to put scarce veterinary resources closest to the user as possible, so it's there and available for them 24/7. And our enterprise partners in the food, in the pharma space, find that tremendously valuable because in some cases, Vera acts as a customer care replacement. So in a couple of organizations, Vera sits in front of their customer care operation, all people. So instead of people having to answer questions, Vera answers questions. And in two of our larger engagements, she'll answer between 70 and 80% of the questions without any human intervention. That's incredibly powerful. It helps our partners both save money. Many of them struggle with hiring and training entry-level customer care people. Now they can reserve and utilize their human talent for the most challenging problems and utilize Vera to answer those questions that get asked over and over again. And the other kind of wonderful thing for veterinary practices is, Vera, we have a version of Vera that sits as a front desk where she can essentially answer the phone, answer questions, do basic triage. She can triage people into the hospital, make an appointment for them. She can tell them, no, let me give you some advice. This doesn't sound like a medical issue. Here's some things you can do at home. And if you have to, if you see the following, then come back in. So I think many, what you're starting to see over the next several years is Vera's deployment all throughout the veterinary health industry, putting Vera closest to the user as possible. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish by putting veterinary expertise as close to the user, real veterinary expertise with real deep knowledge, not just generalized knowledge, with very specific knowledge. That'll help our end users really have a much better, more efficient, and ultimately a really satisfying experience. And that's really what our aim is.
Amazing. This is mind blowing to me, what this thing has the capabilities of. So Cal, you touched on how there is sort of a shortage of veterinarians right now. And I think this was really pronounced during the pandemic, especially when there was this huge increase in pet ownership. Vets were very overworked, particularly, a shortage of vets in like more remote rural areas. So I guess my question is, right now, obviously a licensed vet is a trusted source of information, but where else are you finding that pet owners are going to for information if they can't get a hold of their vet or if they can't get in that day? Where is sort of like the maybe number 2, 3, 4 most popular sources of info for pet owners?
Yeah, and the number one by a long shot is Dr. Google. And as we all know, Dr. Google is not a great source of health information, either for human health or for animal health. Yes, you can learn generic things there, but again, because there's no capability to understand your specific situation and deliver essentially a differential diagnosis, asking clarifying questions that get to a better answer, all you're going to end up with is generalities. And that not only is, that may not be helpful, and in some cases, it may be detrimental. So we know that in animal health in the United States, at least, there are about 30 million questions asked every month of Dr. Google about, companion animal questions. My dog has diarrhea. What should I do? My cat is vomiting. There are about 30 million questions a month asked of Dr. Google. So I think most pet parents, in the absence of either not being able to contact the veterinarian, not wanting to go to the veterinarian because of the costs associated with that, as the shortage has affected everybody, including veterinary practices. So at least in the United States, it's anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks to get an appointment because they just are so busy, they can't take everybody. And if you look at the data, and we have some significant data that shows the growth of animal health, both companion and food animal production, is really a hockey stick over the last 15, 20 years. And our ability to add new veterinarians to the system, is barely keeping up with our losses. You know, we have people churn out because they retire or they leave the industry. We have round numbers in the United States, about somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 new veterinarians that graduate. We have about a similar number to leave the industry every year. So best case, we're kind of treading water. You know, so the supply of trained veterinary expertise isn't growing anywhere near at the rate at which it needs to grow in order to keep up with demand. So I think you're going to see this problem getting worse. So people go to Google to get questions and answers. The second place to go is their friend network, whether that's in person, talking to other pet owners, whether that's on Facebook or on TikTok. So they either rely on their real social connections or social media to solve problems. And I think there are a number of companies that are in very fragmented and very specialized areas trying to come up with ways to help people get questions answered. One of the things that AskVet does is we have a wellness subscription service that customers can sign up for. It's a monthly subscription. The cost of that depends on what level of service you check, but it makes veterinary expertise available to them 24/7. And I think there are others who are doing something similar. I think pet parents are looking for all kinds of alternatives because, unfortunately, they just can't get the veterinary help they need on demand. And modern pet parents, people under the age of 40, millennial pet parents and younger, we live in a world where they want things on their terms. And waiting till 6 or 8 weeks to go see a veterinarian because you're concerned about your pet isn't what they want. So I think what's happened, the shortage is forcing them to find alternative ways to get veterinary and animal health advice. And many of those aren't trusted, aren't necessarily good, aren't vetted. So we're living in a period where people are struggling to find alternatives to going to the vet. And I think most of the alternatives, Dr. Google, social media, your friends network, aren't necessarily the best sources, again, depending on your problem and situation. Mm-hmm. So that's where people are turning to right now. And unfortunately, a lot of them, we hear this all the time from our users, they're just not getting great advice because there isn't enough veterinary expertise out there. Notice that when I say veterinary expertise, I don't necessarily mean people, I just mean access to information. Mm-hmm. And today, the way you can get that is primarily through people. What we're trying to do with the utilization of AI and data and the building of our Vera product is really make that all virtual, make that all AI based, and drive that as close as possible to end users. That's really what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. I think you mentioned that Vera can speak 27 languages. So is this available to pet parents around the world, or is there any geographical restriction?
No, it's available. It's available around the world. We haven't promoted it anywhere but in the United States, just because we're busy doing it here in the U.S. We plan to move to a much more worldwide deployment. Obviously, that's why we've really focused on having her expand her language capabilities. Probably by the end of next year, she'll probably speak all of the world's major languages. My guess is we'll be probably up to 70 or 80 languages by the end of this year. Okay. Be conversant in. So, yeah, our plan is to really make Vera a global tool that can be accessible by people. Again, the whole goal here is to put veterinary expertise as close as possible to the user and make it available to them 24/7 on demand. That's really what AI and data has really done for us. And we think this is transformative, not just in the veterinary industry, and it'll be transformative in every industry, but certainly the veterinary industry needs it more than most because of this acute shortage that we talked about.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think you've framed up really nicely the big gaps and the needs for technology like this. I'm just wondering about how receptive veterinarians have been and if any of them feel maybe slightly threatened by Vera. So could you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, when I started the company in 2014, I think there was a lot of reticence and skepticism about virtual care in general. I think people didn't trust it. I think the main problem with veterinarians, they've for the last, let's call it 75 years, since World War II, the veterinary industry has been one that has really relied on foot traffic to create revenue. So in their minds, the whole business model was you have to come into the clinic to get service. And everything about the veterinary model was built around traffic, very much like a retail business. So if you think about e-commerce versus retail, in 1985, if you wanted to buy something, you had to go to the store and buy it. Or maybe you had a catalog. That was only about 15% of sales. Most people went to stores. Well, if you look at e-commerce worldwide today, you're talking about, depending on the region, somewhere between 30 and 40% of all commerce being sold online. Well, that's because the internet came along and provided people with on-demand and capabilities. And as logistics abilities got better to ship things quicker, people could have things much more fast to get exactly what they needed, and you could price shop it, right? So internet changed that model for retailers, where if you were a retailer in 1985, you had this view that people had to come to your store to buy something. Today, if you talk to a modern retailer, they would tell you the secret to success is an omni-channel presence, where you're both in physical retail, both in online retail. And you see this with, people like Amazon started out full virtual retail. Now they bought Whole Foods. I'm sure they're planning other purchases of, major physical retailers. So now they're trying to get into the physical side. And you see all of the major physical retailers, trying to have presence online. So I think the future for retail is omni-channel. You can buy anything any way you want it. The same is becoming true on the veterinary side. It was the previous way of thinking was, I got to go to the vet to get a service. And the vet's way of thinking was, the only way I know how to bill you is if you come into my office. So they saw virtual care as a potential interruption and threat to their income stream. So in the beginning, they were highly reticent about it. Well, then something called COVID came along and changed the way they viewed that, because there was no other option but to do it virtually. So our business quadrupled in the 2019 to 2022 because of the need and the value that virtual care provided. So in the beginning, I think the veterinary industry was very hesitant to see virtual care as something that could really be an integral part to the delivery of service. I think COVID changed that. And now what people are seeing is they're seeing, all right, it is kind of a mixed model. Now beyond just virtual care, we've now brought AI into the picture. Certainly that's created some skepticism, primarily around, wait, how's this going to affect my revenue stream? Am I going to make more money? Am I going to make less? How do I utilize it so that I can make more money and it doesn't distract? But what's at the core of the problem is this shortage, this gap between supply and demand. And I think most of the veterinary industry, particularly younger veterinarians, starting to realize that, hey, we're going to have to start to adopt this, because we can't continue to have just people come in order to provide service, because there are not enough of us to provide the service in person. And I think that's what everybody's starting to realize, that the shortage is going to get worse, not better. We've got to come up with different tools. They want to find ways to not just deploy these tools, but to make money in the deployment of these tools. So I think that's kind of the transition needs to happen. I think the veterinary industry is starting to understand, although there's still reticence and resistance, trying to understand that in order to the successful delivery of service in the future will be multi-channel. It'll involve both virtual, it'll involve physical, and it'll involve AI and data, depending on the need and the use case. So yeah, I think for the next few years, you're going to see some reticence to the adoption of these tools, but ultimately they're going to be forced to adopt it. One, because the supply and demand gap, but two, I think younger veterinarians, those graduating from school, are far more open-minded and understand, hey, I think we can make money utilizing this. And as you know, the shortage has created tremendous amount of anxiety and burnout, frustration, and churn in the industry. A lot of professionals are leaving the industry because it's an industry that's fraught with stress and anxiety, and that shortage hasn't made that, and it's made that much worse. So I think in order to relieve some of that anxiety and stress and burnout on the professionals who work in it, tools like Vera will become a critical element to be able to respond to all of those questions that they get asked over and over again that don't necessarily require a human being to answer, because we know that the AI and the data can provide as good, and maybe in some cases, a more comprehensive answer that a human being might be able to provide. So I think the adoption will start to happen. And I think that in the next 5 years, you're going to see a mixed service delivery model where all of these new tools, virtual care, AI, data, will all get merged into one service delivery package that veterinarians will be able to monetize, make money on, and actually rationalize that delivery of service based on the supply-demand gap. I think that's what needs to happen. There's certain cases that would obviously, like surgeries or cleanings, obviously require human intervention because until we come up with physical bots that can do surgeries and dentals, human beings still need to do that. But there's all of these things that in between, before that, that don't necessarily require a human visit or human expertise. Requires expertise, not necessarily human expertise. And I think that's where data and AI and tools like Vera will come in and make a major contribution to the rationalization of the delivery of service. That's really my view of the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Vera really is just there to provide advice and respond to questions, and you still need the veterinarian to diagnose, to prescribe surgeries, cleanings, like you mentioned. So you also talked about how I think you were saying that Vera has the ability to diagnose and could certainly, I think, prescribe based on the vast amount of knowledge that Vera has. But I think you said it was the vet-client-patient relationship that was currently sort of preventing her from doing those things. And I'm just wondering if you can foresee a future where maybe Vera could one day do those things, diagnose and prescribe. And I'm thinking in my head, like my kids are older now, but when they were younger, we saw Big Hero 6, and Baymax was one of the big bubble characters, and he was essentially like a doctor, but he was a robot, and he could diagnose you, he could prescribe, and you could do this whole doctor visit without ever actually speaking with a human being. Do you see that in the future for Vera? Can you picture a world where that happens?
Yeah, I do. And I think what's important is that it's all about the use cases, right? And how you deploy her and where you and what use cases you deploy her to solve. She's very smart, can answer all kinds of questions, can diagnose and prescribe. And I think, California is a good example of how they move towards the creation of a virtual VCPR. So I think other states will follow. A number of them are talking about it. I think virtual VCPR will be the first step in the ability for not just virtual veterinarians, human beings who are virtual, but virtual technologies like Vera to be able to intake a case, understand it, be able to process it and say, yep, I know what's happening here because I've seen this before many times, millions of times, and I know exactly what to prescribe, and I know exactly what questions to ask in order to determine whether it's this situation or this one, right? So I think as the technology advances and as people's comfort with the AI's capability to deliver accurate, precise information, I think that's where the policy will follow. And there will be essentially a stratification of service delivery and of the VCPR to allow certain things to happen under certain circumstances. So in other words, if you have created a virtual VCPR, you have access to medical records for that particular animal. And by the way, everything I'm talking about applies in human health too. And you can say, yep, we have the access to records. We know what this pet's health history is like. We have access to all this data. And yes, we've created a virtual VCPR. Yes, now we can go about, and Vera can diagnose. And of course, in our system, the fail-safe is always built that if she ever has encountered a situation she's not 100% clear about, she refers it to a human being. So in our system, we have the capabilities for Vera to essentially instantaneously transfer a conversation to a human being. And in many cases, the user doesn't know that actual transfer happened. That's how seamless it is. You can't tell the difference. Wow. So I think models like we've built will become key to the future of how, as I said, service will be stratified and delivered. If you think about the cost of human healthcare, they're really trying to work through ways that they can now deliver the service with the appropriate resource, rather than rather than the sledgehammer that solves all problems. Right today, the model is go to the doctor because that'll solve all your problems. That's true, but it's an expensive way to do it. It was the only way we knew how to do it. But now with these modern technologies and with the ability for these tools, these AI engines to access data, we now can say, no, that's not the only way to solve problems, to answer questions. We have the capability to do it at a level of accuracy and efficiency that we've never been able to do before. So I think that will change the way that we're able to deliver service. And yes, I do see the day when these artificially intelligent robots will be able to make recommendations, prescribe, do diagnoses, read blood work. I mean, we're testing Vera now. We're fairly confident that Vera can very accurately interpret lab panels. We put them through a series of tests. We have not launched this capability, but we believe within the next 12 to 18 months, she'll be able to extremely accurately read a lab. You'll be able to submit a lab to her, and she'll be able to give you a series of analysis and options and potential diagnoses based on her assessment of lab work. So imagine being able to deploy that inside a veterinary clinic to get an early reading. So again, the pet would take a lab, that lab would come back, it would be sent into Vera, and what the actual physical doctor, the human doctor, would see is an assessment of the lab. And they look at it and say, yep, that sounds right to me. Go with this, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of them having to review it and think, oh, wait a minute, what could be going on here? Let me ask some people, let me do some research, I'm not sure. Vera would provide them with essentially the first draft of an assessment of a diagnosis, which they can review. Mm-hmm. Think of how much time that would save. Think of how powerful that tool would be. So I definitely see a future where artificial intelligence takes up a major part of the gap in this supply-demand gap.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Cal, do you envision a time where Vera, maybe she could now, could actually write the examination that veterinarians have to write to become licensed? Would she pass? Would she ace it? Could she become a licensed vet?
One of our goals in the next 12 months is to get Vera to pass the state veterinary board. We believe today she could take one and pass it.
Wow.
That's how capable.
So what would that mean? She would actually be a licensed veterinarian, this bot?
See, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question because that's where policy meets technology. Mm-hmm. And as I said, we don't know the answer yet. So I think, let's assume within the next year, we'll get Vera to take a state veterinary board, a U.S. state veterinary board, and she passes. Then that is a good question. Then what happens? Yeah. That's where the policy is going to need to catch up. So, yeah. And if you think about it, if she can pass the test, why wouldn't she be as qualified as a veterinarian?
Yeah.
And again, that's a policy question, right? And that's a difficult one for me to answer. I'm not a politician. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of the quality of the output, it'll be as good as a human could do. And I think if you look at some of the early studies that have been done in human medicine, they have found that some of the AI's outputs actually are as good and in some cases better than human doctor responses to the same problem.
Wow.
And I think the same would be true in animal health too, because as human beings, we're all fallible, right?
Yeah.
We forget, we're busy, we're stressed, we're tired.
Yeah.
We don't make perfect decisions all the time. Bots don't have any of those problems. And I'm not saying bots are perfect, they make mistakes too. But the better your data set and the more highly trained and qualified and QC your data set is, the less likely it is to make errors. And people always say to me, well, Cal, how can you be sure that Vera never makes errors? And I'm like, well, can you tell me that every practicing veterinarian never makes an error? Mm-hmm. If you look at the human side and look at malpractice, you find a number of situations where human beings make mistakes, and those mistakes are extremely costly. So the humans aren't perfect either. So the question is, are the bots as imperfect as the humans, or are they less imperfect? I don't know the answer to that. And then I think the policymakers at that point have to decide, well, how do we treat these bots? Because they're able to provide similar, maybe even better responses than human beings can. Should we certify them? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I I don't see why not. If she could pass this exam, it's so, yeah, blowing my mind. Yeah, so that was another question I was going to ask you, was just about what would happen if Vera gave bad advice, gave the wrong answer, and there was a consequence for a dog or a cat. So have you ever had that happen? Could it happen, given the amazing database that you've built, and who would be, I guess, responsible if that happened?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yes, of course it could happen, and we work extremely hard. I'd say that my veterinary team, and I have one of the best on the planet, reviewing this stuff and understanding the intersection of medicine and data and AI. That's the expertise we've built. I think the likelihood of errors are low. I'm not going to say they're zero, but they're low. And I think we're constantly reviewing the data. And in the case of errors, on the animal health side, at least in the United States, there's limited liability because animal life in and of itself doesn't have inherent value like human life does. So, I think the most we would be responsible for is the replacement value of an animal. We've done more than 2 million sessions, and that 2 million sessions, I'm not aware of, and I don't believe we've had any single complaints filed against us. These are mostly with our human doctors, right? And in this virtual care model, we haven't seen any issues. And again, I think it's one of those things where we work extremely hard to minimize problems, issues, erroneous responses. But nothing's perfect. We'll make mistakes. And at that point, we will bear liability for those mistakes. And again, at least if we're doing human health, I think the liability would be significantly more threatening, much greater risk. On the animal side, less so. So it's kind of a good way to sort of test some of these things out too. And I think over a longer period of time, probably not necessarily within my lifespan, these tools have become so perfect that they'll be pretty tough to beat. They'll make fewer and fewer errors over time. One of the things that we really find about this technology is it's self-learning, which is that's a little bit disconcerting, right? That it actually is starting to learn. So I'll give you a real life example. Our veterinary team was playing with Vera, and I asked the question, hey, this was about 6-7 months ago, can we read a lab result? And one of our chief veterinarians said, I have no idea. She goes, I'm going to submit a lab. I'm going to have Vera ingest the lab and see what she does. So I said, yeah, it'd be kind of cool. We have no idea. It could be a nothing. She could respond. We don't know what she was going to do. So Vera responded. She got a lab within a matter of seconds. She gave a full analysis of the lab we submitted. And our veterinary team, there are 5 of them, and they all looked at it and they're like, wow, these are like great responses. And we can't fault anything with this. So we had a bunch of other veterinarians not associated with the company, faculty members at universities do something similar, and we're getting very similar responses. Yeah, her lab results are astounding. She's really accurate in her ability to read these things. So it's one of these things where we never taught her to read a lab.
Wow.
That's what's fascinating.
Yeah.
We never trained her to specifically read a lab. She was able to do that on her own. So that all made us, when we got this result, we all sat back and said, whoa, this is really interesting, because we never trained her up on this, but because of all the information that she ingested, again, we ingested curricula textbooks, we ingested all kinds of textbooks from veterinary school. So from all the stuff she ingested, she was able to learn how to read a lab. That really made us scratch our heads and like, wow, this stuff is way more powerful than we even think it is. So yeah. I think even those of us who are intimately involved with data and AI are starting to be surprised by some of the results we're seeing. when you really unleash the AI tool on a data set. So I think that's what's really interesting. And I think people ask me, oh, where are we in this game? If I use the baseball analogy, people say, oh, are we in the fourth inning or the fifth inning? I'm like, we haven't even left the dugout yet. We haven't started with the national anthem yet. We're just beginning.
Yeah.
The game hasn't even started. We're in the pregame, right? And already we're seeing some fairly amazing output from various, intelligent bots that have been built in a variety of industries. And I think you're going to see the pace of development and innovation accelerate dramatically, especially as the AI itself is starting to learn and teach itself. That's the part that I'm really fascinated by.
Yeah.
And those of us inside the industry talk about it. And we're also thinking this could really change extremely quickly, because AI abilities, the more data she gathers, the more she has to ingest, the faster she learns. It's fascinating.
It's so revolutionary, so innovative, and could just completely change the way veterinary medicine is practiced. I mean, it's incredible. And I want to talk a little bit before we close off, just about the human health aspect, because you said all of this applies to human health, and you're based in the U.S., Cal. I'm based in Canada, and our healthcare system right now is really not in a good shape at all. There's a shortage of doctors, particularly in more remote areas of Canada, shortage of nurses. ER rooms are constantly operating over capacity, sometimes at 200% capacity. It's really hard for people to get healthcare when they need it. You're waiting sometimes years to see specialists. It's really tough here. And, one thing that I always wonder about is, when you go to the ER, particularly at night when there may not be many other options, and there's usually a nurse or a nurse practitioner there who's sort of triaging, this is where I can really see a role for Vera to be able to say, okay, here's your symptoms, here's your diagnosis, if we can get to that point where she's diagnosing, and then to actually be able to say to people, you don't need to be here, go see your primary care physician the next day or something. I can see that really helping with ER wait times. And I think there's a huge need in veterinary medicine, but I almost feel like there's a greater need in human healthcare to really optimize the care that everybody's receiving.
No, that's totally right. I mean, we see it now, right? So triage is the core of what Vera does, and the beginnings of why we built her, right? So I'll give you an example, at least from then I'll apply this to human health. We have most of the pet insurance companies are clients of ours, and they use either Vera or our veterinary care team to essentially put them in front of their policyholders. So why did they do that? So if you think about insurance for a minute, so we have pet insurance, right? You have pet insurance for your pet, and you see a symptom presentation, diarrhea, vomiting, something that's unnerving you. What do? You go to the veterinarian, right? And if you're an insurance company, here's what now happened. The least experienced person in health made a decision to triage themselves into a doctor's office, where you, the insurance company, as the payor, had to pay. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right. Yeah.
So, and the average office visit in the U.S. is about $225, round numbers. So they've now shelled out against their risk pool $225. So what a number of them are now starting to do is put our capabilities, Vera and our veterinary team, in front of the policyholder first. So they say, before you make the decision, go to the vet, go here, talk to Vera, talk to an ask veterinarian if Vera isn't sufficient. Mm-hmm. And they do that. And what that does is it's essentially allowed Vera to triage them and say, given all the things that we're seeing, you don't need to go to the vet right now. If you see the following symptoms, come back to us or go to the vet. But given what you've said, and remember, she can ask questions, she gets qualifying answers, mm-hmm. So she can be very precise about what she's recommending. She'll say, I don't think you need to go to the vet. Well, if you're an insurance company now and you put that capability, again, closest to the user as possible, the policyholder uses Vera first, and they say, oh, I see, you did solve my problem. I see what you're talking about. I'll wait and see. Sounds like I changed food too dramatically, mm-hmm. which is what caused the problem. I didn't gradually change out the food. So I'll now back up and do some gradual change. And if things don't change and things continue to the vomiting still continues, I'll either call you back or I'll go see my vet. But for now, you've answered my question. I probably don't need to go in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're the insurance company, what have you done? You've arbitraged a $225 vet visit for a $35 virtual visit or a conversation with Vera.
Mm-hmm.
So it's dramatically saved their affected positively their risk pool, and it satisfied their customer need to get their problem solved without going to the veterinarian. Because as pet parents, if we don't need to go to the vet, we don't want to go either. It's inconvenient. We have to take time off from work. It's going to cost us money, even though we're covered by insurance. So if you can get your problem solved without having to go in, you'd rather do that. So a number of our U.S. insurance companies are our partners exactly for that reason, because we help triage prior to a pet parent taking their pet into the veterinarian. Think about that in human health. Same applies, right? If their bots can triage in an effective way, then it lowers the cost of insurance because you've traded out a expensive off visit for a less expensive virtual visit, and more importantly, you preserve the limited availability of real doctor time for those cases that really need it. Right? Same true on the animal
side. Yeah.
So I think that's what's really valuable. But as I call it the rationalization of service delivery. If you can utilize these virtual tools, whether they're bots or virtual human beings, to essentially rationalize the delivery of service, you can preserve the human service where people really do need to get involved for those cases that really need it. And that really helps alleviate the supply-demand problem. Doesn't solve it completely, but it certainly is a good first step in solving, alleviating the pressure that problem creates.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. So Cal, tell us, pet parents, veterinarians, how do we use your system? How do they get access?
Yeah. Go to askvet.app. That's where it all starts. ask.vet .app. It's askvet.app. askvet.app. And if you want to, and if for any enterprise who may be interested, they can go there and they can click. There's a button there that says request a demo. They can get an enterprise demo of how Vera might work for their own enterprise case. So go to askvet.app, askvet.app, to see Vera, to learn more about her, and to sign up for a demo for as an enterprise for how we might work in your particular enterprise.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the time. I learned so much. This was such an interesting discussion for me, and I'm sure our listeners will feel the same way. So thank you again, and thanks to all our listeners for tuning in.